So I warmly welcome you, Professor Northoff, to deliver your lecture.
For the nice introduction, and also thank you for the invitation. And it's for me really a learning experience that your rich tradition in consciousness really contrasts the poor tradition of consciousness in the Western world and the rich tradition of the mind in the Western world. It really seems to almost complementary. And when I see sort of here your tradition this morning and yesterday, and I also speak with others, meditators, it's really amazing how some of my initial ideas, which come from the psychiatry, from the phenomenology, converge with some of your ideas. Of course, that's my own bias, and you are able to judge, hopefully, after my talk. So let's start. It's really the question which really drives me. It's already clear. It's consciousness's subjectivity. So let me throw some light on it. And for me, it's really very important to have work at the interface between the empirical, the phenomenological, and the ontological. And I will really try to focus here particularly on the empirical phenomenological, which though has deep ontological implications. So my talk consists of 4 things, and we developed over the years, 2017 first published, what I call the temporal spatial theory of consciousness, and I will try to put some flesh to the bones, and of course the time is short, so I have to run a little bit. So a lot of questions will probably remain open. First, I want to present a brief theoretical framework. Nothing is more important than a theoretical framework, not only in philosophy, also in science. The kind of models you have drives the way you set up your experiment and your analysis. Western neuroscience is often not aware of that. Second, I will point out one key mechanism, one of the many mechanisms of consciousness, temporal spatial alignment, synchronization alignment with the world. Then I will, there I will present empirical data. Third, I will present the empirical alignment in the meditation. And then I come to a conclusion that I basically make a plea for what I call spatial temporal neuroscience. So let me start. So theoretical background is something. TTC, temporal spatial theory of consciousness. TTC, and a claim, a key, I cannot emphasize it as much, key claim of the TTC is that something is shared by world, brain, and consciousness. And the body is, of course, included there too. Yeah? So that's very important. So the emphasis is here in the TTC on fundamental features shared by world, brain, and consciousness, rather than searching for what is special about consciousness as distinct from the world. So you can say, as I understand, the first part of that sentence is your tradition. The second part of that sentence is the Western tradition. And I was working myself through the Western tradition. So let me briefly explain. In the morning there was a heart problem by David Chalmers, an easy problem, hard problem, mind-body problem, explanatory gap problem, philosophy of mind, formulated various problems. For me, all these problems consist in the fact that there's no, philosophically speaking, necessary relation between the neuronal and the mental. Yeah, we are lacking. It remains contingent. That's what the explanatory gap describes. That's what the heart problem describes. That ultimately also what the mind-body problem describes. So that gap contingency, I argue, we need to look for something which is shared between the neuronal and the mental, and ultimately also that leads us back also to the world. That's what I called in the paper 2020 common currency. It's like we speak English, you understand me, we share that. If I were speaking German, I'm from Germany originally, you were speaking Hindi, we could not exchange ideas. We wouldn't have anything in common. So meaning, then I would say consciousness would remain impossible. So, and that's a key theoretical assumption that drives all the research. Now you say, and of course what is shared, sorry, that's the wrong one. Wrong one. Okay. What is shared is space and time, topography, the kind of spatial organization of neuronal activity, whole brain, and dynamic temporal feature, temporal structure, temporal pattern. Now, you might say, Northoff, then what is topography and dynamic? Of course, I cannot go into detail, but I just give you one idea is, for instance, geometric shapes. I was listening to a very experienced dancer, and she told me all about geometric shapes in the kind of postures she does. That was, of course, for me highly interesting, because I say, where do these geometric shapes come from? She said they come from nature. If they come from nature, they must be also present in the brain, because the brain is a part of nature. So here you have an opening door for an empirical analysis based on phenomenology. Yeah, and energy waves. Of course, I don't need to tell you that you know all this. You tell me all about energy in your meditation, in your experiences. And I say, look, these are basic features of nature. They are present in nature. And because the brain is an organ of nature, they must also be present in the brain. And that's a key assumption, which I think is Western philosophy often neglects that. Yeah? And if that is so, then also manifest in consciousness. So here I have a beautiful quote by Tesla, Nikola Tesla, you know, the car guy who was an engineer at the turn of the 19th, 20th century. Highly recommended to look him up in Wikipedia, because he was quite an eccentric personality. So it's no wonder that Elon Musk, who is himself a very interesting but also somewhat eccentric personality, picks him up. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, vibration. And I take that very literally. And you will see this. I take this first, of course, here you see waves. You see a lot of brain waves too. And you can analyze these brain waves. Electrical engineering has a lot of signal processing tools, how you can analyze these brain waves. And we pick up a lot, and I will show you some of that later. Yeah? And then the same kind of waves should also be mentally present. If you can measure them, then you can use the same tools. Now I show you a very quick example. I don't want to go much into detail of that, but here for depression, because I'm a psychiatrist, he pointed it out. Psychiatry is for me yet another learning experience. So the kind of phenomena, the kind of experience these patients tell you, they're sometimes very bizarre, but they're possible. So what happens in the brain? And we have a distinctively spatial temporal approach to these disorders. So what does that mean? We look for space-time changes on the phenomenal level, how the space-time changes impact your symptoms, and then we look for corresponding space-time changes in the brain. Here I give you an example. So one typical feature of depression is slowness. When you have a depressed patient, a severely depressed patient, not when you just got your paper rejected or whatever, but a severely depressed where you have to see him or me, which usually you don't want. Yeah? So then the first thing is you're completely slow. You probably you don't move. We call this psychomotor retardation. And also your thoughts are always the same, ruminating. They don't change. Yeah? And you feel energetically weak. So these are typical features. And of course, if you feel weak, you have social withdrawal, you become sad. So all these emotional cognitive symptoms are secondary consequences of this primary, as I would say, space-time phenomenology. So now what we did here, I just should give you a short example here. So for instance, and I really like this, one of our engineers came up with that. So we looked for thought dynamic. So we asked the patients and also healthy subject to continuously indicate when their thought content changes, whether more internal, more about the self, or the thought content more about the external world. So, and we got, for engineers now I say something completely normal, we got a time series of 300 data, and then we could do a power spectrum on that. So we could do a power spectrum on their thoughts, and we could analyze the frequency. That's a dynamic approach to thought. Yeah, has not been done in the cognitive tradition, and you can imagine the reviewers gave us a really hard time. Yeah, and here you see, for instance, like this, I think it doesn't work here. Here you see on the right, you see upper, you see the power spectrum. On the x-axis, you see the frequency. On the y-axis, you see the power. And you see in certain frequencies, and the healthy subject, the upper one is the healthy subject, you see quite a good power, and you see quite a variation in the frequency of the changes. Yeah. In the lower part, that's a depressed patient. You see, power is down. No power. That's why we coined the paper powerless. And that's exactly what these people experience. They have no energy. I can't move. I have no energy. I'm drained. My body is there. That's exactly what they tell you. Yeah? And there's not much change. Everything remains the same. You see the frequencies are very low. Yeah? So, and we can also use this as a differential diagnostic instrument for distinguishing depression and major depressive disorder and depression and bipolar, but that's just a side note. But that tells you you can measure your cognitive functions in a dynamic way. Yeah, and we would discussed it. We would love to do this in meditation patients. So next one, then you say, how do you measure dynamic on the neuronal level? One way is, again, we presented visual stimuli, fast and slow. This is lower left, fast and slow, and positive and neutral and negative. And then we could see that the depressed patients, particularly here in the middle, lower, in the cortical midline structures, showed decreased response to specifically the fast negative stimuli. Yeah, so their neuronal activity, and we have other lines of studies, their neuronal activity is also too slow. Yeah, it's literally too slow. We had a paper in 2018, too slow, too fast. Okay, good. And then it correlated with psychomotor retardation, lower right. So here you see from the cognitive level, we also develop a space-time experience scale that we try to link space and time as the glue between the behavior level, psychomotor retardation, the neuronal level, the phenomenal level, and even the cognitive level. Because they all suffused, shaped by the dynamic. So dynamic is here a basic underlying fundamental features. So now I come to the TTC consciousness. What is the TTC, temporal spatial theory consciousness? You see that the Western theories usually assume one specific mechanism which is special compared to everything else what happens in the brain, and that's sort of an add-on. It's very Cartesian, it's a neuronal dualism in the brain, a special mechanism for consciousness and then non-special mechanism for non-consciousness. That's neuronal Cartesian. So the TTC doesn't follow that. The TTC says we go into the basic features of the brain, time-space. It constructs its own time-space topography dynamic. So that's why we assume 4 different temporal spatial mechanisms. Temporal spatial nestedness is basically about scale-free activity for the expert. Alignment, I will explain in detail. Expansion is rest-task interaction. The contents of consciousness, globalization is the axis. As of the details you can read in the papers. So what is important, you have different dimensions of consciousness. You have the level state, the arousal. You have the form. That's a dimension which we specifically introduce by ourselves. Because that's basically the structure, organization of your consciousness. Topography, dynamic. And then we have the contents of consciousness. And the Western tradition focuses on the contents and the level state. We added the form, and then of course is the axis, the reporting, the global neuronal workspace theory. So I focus here on the temporal spatial alignment and form and structure of consciousness in my talk. And you see, just to give you an idea about the formal, the organization, so we have different kind of mechanism, different kinds of empirical testing, different kind of measures for each mechanism, different kinds of phenomenal features for each mechanism. So what we do in the TTC, we do what a good scientist, at least what I think so, should do, slice up the phenomenon of consciousness without losing it. That's basically what we try, and you will come back later, you will see that these different mechanisms could be basically different layers of consciousness corresponding to different layers of temporal spatial activity in the brain. We're currently developing a dynamic layer theory of brain. So what is alignment? In my discussions with some of you, and I see that the synchronization, the alignment with the environmental context is clear. And it's a very simple thing. Even let's say if you listen music, you tap your foot in the rhythm of the music. You synchronize, you align. Yeah? And that changes your mental states. You do a lot of internal chanting or external chanting. You do respiration. These are rhythms your brain can synchronize with and virtually expand itself beyond its own physical boundaries. Yeah? So it's a virtual spatial temporal expansion, I would say, because now I include the rhythms of the music or the chanting or the breathing into my own field of dynamic or topography or conscious field, as you would say. So alignment is for me a key mechanism. And I make the bold assumption that without alignment, you would not have consciousness. Consciousness would remain impossible. Philosophically speaking, temporal spatial alignment is a necessary condition of possible consciousness. And I think that's where all, I'm sorry to say this, except maybe the predictive coding free energy by Friston, all the Western theory fail. They occur inside the brain. The IIT, recurrent processing, higher order, global neuronal workspace, and all the others, always in the brain. It's a key problem. Okay, so why is that important? So now I try to put some science on this alignment. What is alignment is about? It's about stochastic statistical distribution, the matching of your input sequences from the environment with the continuous activity sequence of your brain. So it's a stochastic matching, and we discuss the exact mechanism of that in that paper there lower left. And what is important, that the brain's intrinsic neural timescales, it has its own inner different timescales, correspond and try to match with the much larger repertoire of the timescales in the environment. Yeah? We don't have the timescales of seismic earth waves, but still somehow we try to synchronize or align with that, for instance, by building devices. Yeah? So that's key, I would argue, for consciousness. And now the question is, how are these mechanisms? So there's the temporal encoding, temporal alignment processing. How does this work? How can you measure that? One, the timescales of the brain, you can measure them with what is called the autocorrelation function. It's basically you measure the relationship between the activity at each time point, across time points, and you get basically a function on the y. On the x-axis, you have the time lags, the time differences, T1 correlating with T2, T1 correlating with T3, and so forth. And then on the x-axis, y-axis, you have the degree of correlation. So, and you can measure that in the brain, and interestingly, you see that the brain has indeed, in different regions, a topography of timescales. Your sensory region's timescales are rather short. So these timescales, you can imagine, is like windows. So when you were in a Zoom session with me, I would probably show you the different window sizes of my office at home. And I show you, and the brain has a multitude of different window sizes through which it connects with the environment. So that's basically, you can imagine. Larger window, and when you look through the windows of your office, you have different things you see. If you have a large window, you see the whole tree, you see the kids playing, and you see the cars. Whereas if you only have a very small window, you might just see the branch of the tree, and you don't even know whether it's a tree or not, or it's a plant standing on a rooftop. Yeah? So, and that's very important. Now you can make the connections to consciousness, how important these time windows, the intrinsic time windows of the brain are. And interestingly, as always, time and space converge. There's a certain topography for them. So in the sensory regions, you need to be quick, fast. So you have shorter windows here. In the cortical midline here, the red stuff there, default mode network, you have longer windows. So topography, dynamic converge. And now you say, Northoff, you still need to show me how these timescales are related to consciousness. So here I refer to an EEG investigation, which a postdoc of mine in Italy, he's actually also a philosopher, but he worked himself into the brain imaging analysis, did. And he investigated patients with sleep, patients in anesthesia, patients in coma, and patients with motor disorder. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, is a very nasty disease. You don't want to have that. And the ALS patients have only motor deficits, but they're still fully conscious. They cannot move, but they have fully conscious. You have also locked-in syndrome, even worse. And the other, in sleep, anesthesia, and coma, you lose your sensory input processing. So basically the idea was, if you lose consciousness, is this really related to a deficit in input processing? If so, you would expect a change in the autocorrelation window, the timescales of the brain. Whereas in the motor condition, because they still have consciousness and intact input processing, but the output processing doesn't work, you would expect intact autocorrelation window. And that's exactly what we saw. You see here, the thing you see here in the lower one, you see the autocorrelation window when you go from sleep, awake, and 1 and 2 and 3. You see the time windows become longer and longer. When you are anesthesia, you have very long time windows, but you don't have the short time windows anymore. Yeah? And in coma too, and in the ALS, the motor on the very right, you don't see a difference between healthy and the ALS people. So that's basically here, when you look at the lower part of this, You see, in the sensory disorders, the input processing, when you lose consciousness, you don't have alignment anymore, you don't have input processing anymore, your time scales become abnormally long. So it's basically like a filter, everything falls into it, and of course, if everything goes into one window and one box, nothing is differentiated anymore. Yeah, and in the motor disorder you have not. So that's an indirect support that consciousness may be related to input processing through the intrinsic timescales. And we have more data in the pipeline supporting that more direct. So then the next question you would ask, how are these timescales? What is the mechanism? As a scientist, of course, you want the exact mechanism. What is it? Why and how do the timescales impact the input processing? So this is something which we discussed a lot in this recent paper this year, that we say there's a temporal integration segregation. So imagine, remember my initial example of the with 2 window sizes in your office. When you have the large window sizes, you have an integration of all the inputs, the playing kids, the car, the trees, the colleagues, and blah, blah, blah. All is basically integrated within the view which you see through that window. Now, so that's a high, and also there, of course, moving here in India, you're very dynamic, everything moves, yeah, so you see also the dynamic, and you see that all within the same window, yeah, because it's large. Now imagine you look through the smaller window. You will not see the kid passing by, running by, and the vendor trying to sell some stuff and blah, 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 because the window is too small, yeah, you simply don't see that dynamic. So, and that we say, okay, there's a temporal integration and temporal segregation. So now you say, how can you prove this? So we're currently running a study where we really try to an experimental design in living data, but the first thing which you do for that, it's always good, you do some computational modeling, which we do more and more. That's why I strongly work with computer science, engineer, and also AI people. So here we did this modeling. You see it's a neural network with different regions. It's a Chaudhuri 2015 papers for the experts. So we, upper left, we presented an input to V1 is visual cortex 1, and then V1 and all the regions there on the left, 20C, is basically from sensory cortex to the cortical midline regions, 24C. Yeah, and you basically see, you see the input upper left, you see the input, 3 different inputs. They're relatively well represented in V1 and the visual regions, but when it comes to the higher regions, let's say TEPD is temporal cortex and 24C, you don't see the 3 inputs anymore in the neuronal activity. Meaning, in 24C, the neuronal activity basically integrates the 3 inputs into one neuronal activity. So the temporally distinct inputs are no longer represented in the neuronal activity of 24C. It's just one big lump. Yeah? Then we did the same for long input, upper right, and you can basically see exactly the same thing again. Visual cortex represents well, 24C smoothes it. Then the next step, we said, is that related, that temporal integration segregation, is that related to the length of the autocorrelation window? Lower right, yes. You see the long autocorrelation window in 24C, the red stuff, lower right, and the pink stuff in V1, very short. So I remember my example with the windows, when you look outside, the small and the large window, that's exactly what these regions contribute. Now you say, yeah, Northoff, nice and good, but how is that related to consciousness? So this is what we're currently testing, so I can only present you a hypothesis. And this is no longer a neuronal hypothesis, this is, as I would say, a neurophenomenal hypothesis. So Federico Serio, oh yeah, okay, I really need to be fast. Okay, so basically what we see here, if you have a normal autocorrelation window, you see the thief and the police guy, and also you hear their speech, but then your window becomes longer, you integrate more, so it becomes blurry. And for the shortage of time, when you completely have a very long window, everything becomes the same because you don't see the dynamic anymore. Yeah, so this is what we assume lower right when you have no consciousness. So yeah, that's different species have different time scales. I skipped that. Same here, the link to artificial intelligence. The importance of time scales, let's say if your robot has only a slow lower picture, only a slow time scale, it will dance too slow to music. If your robot has only a fast time scale, it will dance too fast to music because the music has a different time scale, but I skip that in the sake of time. Let me briefly come to the meditation because that's probably the most interesting thing for you guys. This paper is in press of ours. What we did here is we really try to get the link between meditation and self. So we did Austin Cooper did this as a graduate student of mine, and Bianca Ventura, she's from Italy. So basically what we tried to do here, we did a meta-analysis of imaging data from studies with proficient meditators, because we were really interested in how does the brain change from the non-proficient to the proficient meditator. And we assumed that that is not just a state change, but a trait feature. And to keep it short, here, that's a picture. So what we see in when we review the data, you see sort of a dual topography. You see a topography, a distinction between default mode network and, for instance, sensory regions and control executive network, and that's what you see in that slide. Yeah, you see that's a non-proficient meditator on the left, the proficient on the right, and we said that it's a shift from a dual to a non-dual topography. I keep that out here for matter of time. Now, how does the self come in? I need to bring in a little bit a detour here. We did a lot of studies on the self. The self is an ubiquitous concept, and the self has also different layers. And that is a meta-analysis here on the left, where we thought that really you have an interoceptive layer of self, an extroceptive layer of self, and a mental or cognitive layer of self. This is all based on data, and these involve somewhat overlapping but also different regions. Now, very important that the regions which are recruited during the interoceptive self are also recruited by the extroceptive self and the mental self. So that's a nestedness. Yeah? So it's a recurrence. And I think when you look at your experiences, let's say even on the mental level, it goes very well. There are always some implicit, tacit body elements in the background. And what is important that here, the way we said it here, that the introexo self are nested within the mental self. Now, when we then, this is again data-driven, when we then looked on these regions, on this topography of self in the meditation studies, we saw a reversal. We saw that the interoceptive regions are much more strongly recruited than the regions of the mental self. So this is data-driven, and this is Bianca, the graduate student. She formalized this, visualized this very nicely. So basically your nestedness hierarchy is suddenly reversed. So you have much more interface with your environment in your intro-extroceptive self-processing, and the mental self-processing is now basically nested within the intro-extroceptive self. That's what the data suggest, what the data we saw. And then now the switch to the phenomenology, I would say you have a dual and very local topography of the self in the non-meditative state, and experience of non-duality, non-locality. So what we formalized here, that you have a point of view. You have different layers, which is important. I keep that short. You have different layers of consciousness, where I added some on the y-axis, some different concepts from the Western side. And that also is the phenomenology. You have a background layer and a foreground layer. Usually your background layer is more implicit. The connection, the neuroecological connection, the synchronization with the alignment is usually implicit in the background of your experience. But in meditation, if you really go into deep into state, you probably shift that into the foreground, and your mental experience of duality, locality comes into the background. So of course now we can argue here what duality, locality, I leave that to the discussion. So, and back to the species, I would say that the different species differ in the number of layers / their time scales, and I would say that these different time scales lack in current AI. They don't have alignment. Yeah, they're not adaptive. That was also clear yesterday. So what I would like to do, if somebody from the AI community is open, to build some time scales, intrinsic time scales, into the agents themselves. Conclusion. You have plenty of different theories of consciousness in the Western world. I don't go into that. I just say the TTC distinguish is a whole brain, a global rather than a local approach. not specific regions, not anterior or posterior. I find the discussion completely futile. I would say the brain would smile if it were sitting here, if it hears it. So that's why I focus on topography dynamic. Then, not just inside the brain, but how the brain relates to body and environment. And that's a dynamic relation, it's a topographic relation, rather than the brain itself. Third, that relation is temporal spatial for me, and that provides a common currency, a shared feature like English between us. Then consciousness, and I will flesh that out more, is experience and thus basic to and different from cognition. This is preaching to the choir. And consciousness includes different layers, and I would say it's different spatial temporal mechanisms. So, and by that it bridges many gaps, and that makes it TTC not just a neuronal or empirical theory, but also phenomenological and an ontological, which is very important because I'm also a philosopher. So, that is the current Western situation. You have the mind up there, you have the sensory, affective, cognitive neuroscience, but they cannot really bring in consciousness in there. Usually, as you said earlier, very nicely, the earlier talk, consciousness would be somewhere on top of it. However, and this is long-standing, you see this in my earlier papers, even before I was in India, that consciousness is a more basic feature, and for that we need spatial temporal neuroscience. So spatial temporal neuroscience is for me basically an umbrella, and the cognitive affective neuroscience are just specific subsets of that wider umbrella. Yeah? So basically cognitive affective neuroscience and the different cognitive and emotions feature would be like the different seats in the hall, and the hall itself as such would be for me the dynamic topography / consciousness. And I pointed out, and it's clear, it's a world dynamic with a world-brain relation, world-brain dynamics. That allows a transformation of a neuronal state into phenomenal feature. The concept of transformation was briefly mentioned in the morning, and I think it's a key ontological feature. We need a transformation-based ontology, not an entity-based ontology. And the brain function is just an abstraction. It's an abstraction of one particular time and space scale from the much larger dynamic repertoire of different time scales. And that gives us the common currency, and with that I try to conclude my talk. Thank you very much.
I thought I will be sharing with you some of our studies that we have undertaken in the Department of Neurophysiology, NIMHANS, on meditation. These experiments have been carried out to get an idea about how to take empirical studies to understand consciousness in future. So these are not directly related to, or to study consciousness. And in the last 2 days, now we have had many talks on meditation as a model to understand consciousness. So meditative techniques, you know that especially are excellent tools for neuroscientists to understand the numerous potentials of our brain. For example, especially with the introduction or invention of MRI study, MRI imaging technique, there are many studies have been carried out to understand how meditation practices induce various changes on the brain. Like, say, for example, how it brings changes in the physical structure of the brain and enhance the fiber tract integrity. So you can see that meditation induces various aspects of plasticity, and this is just to study the structural plasticity. And studies have shown that meditation, long-term meditation, that is meditation experience for more than 30,000 hours of meditation practices, how it induces various structural changes, how it enhances the cortical thickness. And it is not that indiscriminately it enhances the cortical thickness. It is only enhances the cortical thickness of certain areas of the brain. These areas are associated with attention control, emotion regulation and self-regulation, and awareness. So when these areas are activated, and you can see that there is an enhanced cognition, and this also reduces or you can see the dynamics of the central executive network with the DMN, and that regulates the DMN, that is the default mode network, and thus reduces mind wandering, rumination, and so on. And also you can see that the function, so it is the meditation practices not only induces various structural plasticity, it also induces various functional plasticity. For example, this is one example I just wanted to bring into your notice. Sahaja Marga meditation, for almost more than 16 years of practice, the meditators have showed the enhancement of the fronto-midline theta. So fronto-midline theta is one of the specific, the EEG wave activity that you can generate only with with a nervous system that has got with an extensive network activity. So that means an ordinary brain, we will not be able to study the FM theta or record FM theta only when there is some kind of extensive plasticity. See, for example, through meditation, you can see or you can record this FM theta, and it has been shown that FM theta is associated with extreme blissful ecstatic state of meditation. So when you are meditating, you can see that it brings ecstatic state of happiness. This is, as you know, that meditative practices are initiated in ancient India as a tool to establish an ideal mind-body harmony. And it is through this mind-body harmony only this harmony only can bring inner peace and happiness. So these are all simple examples what we can study through neuroscience. And another example is, for example, this is mindfulness Buddhist meditation, and they have Lutz and his colleagues. This is Richard Davidson's group, and they have observed high gamma activity, and this high gamma activity is associated with, this is essential for binding of information, especially the quality of moment-to-moment awareness. So you know that Buddhist meditation, they use the mindfulness technique, and this moment-to-moment awareness is very present, time awareness is very important. So with this background, I will just share with you the studies, what we are doing in the department. So we have initially asked only one question, whether the proficiency and practice can influence brain states. And brain states across various conditions. See, for example, during meditation, when they are performing some cognitive task, as well as during sleep, when they are sleeping. So this is the simple question we have asked. And these are the EEG records we have recorded. You can see that this EEG looks like, this is from a novice meditator, less than 1,000 hours of meditation practice. And here you can see that the EEG record looks like a highly desynchronized waves. Whereas in this, just can you help me? Can someone help? Not pointer, yeah. Whereas in long-term meditators, you see that there is an enhanced synchronized oscillation you can see throughout the brain. So this enhanced synchronized oscillations indicate the brain integration. Brain integration means there is enhanced connectivity across the different parts of the brain. So this enhanced integration of brain is nothing but, when the whole brain is integrated, you are nothing but, you are only happy. You are, the inner peace and happiness you can experience. And what we have done, so we have just decomposed these EEG waves and looked at the power spectra, and we have seen that we could dissociate the EEG changes across different meditation techniques. See, for example, this is, we have studied in Vipassana meditation, and you all know that Vipassana meditation includes various meditation techniques. See, for example, they start the meditation with Anapana, that is nothing but breath awareness, continue with Vipassana, then ends the meditation with a Metta Bhavana. So Metta Bhavana is just like generating loving kindness to yourself as well as to the outside. So you can see that the mental state, it is an emotionally intense state. Whereas here you can see Anapanasati and Vipassana, it is, you are concentrating on the sensations and feeling that is going on your body and thoughts. So that is like you can see that you have to give more, there is increased awareness and increased concentration. That means it is a cognitively intense state. And also across meditation groups, the novice as well as the senior meditators or long-term meditators. And we have observed, I think somebody should help me to, change the slide. So, and what we have observed, we have seen that across, whether it is a novice meditator or an experienced meditator, we have seen a global increase in the power during meditation. So from rest to, during meditation, you can see an increase in power. And this increase in power, so that means during meditation, there is there is an appropriate brain change, brain activity, brain dynamics are happening, and thus you are entering into an altered state of consciousness actually. And this again, even though there is a global increase in power, you can see that we could again dissociate that between the brain state, meditation state, as well as between the groups. That is the novice and the experienced meditators. For example, advanced meditators, we have seen both trait effect as well as state effect. Trait effect means even during, it's a permanent change that is brought by the practice, and that is enhanced theta alpha. Theta alpha is associated with an emotion regulation, self-regulation, and also enhanced attention. Whereas in the state effect, that is only during meditation, we see that especially advanced meditators have brought enhanced alpha as well as during anapana and vipassana, that is that cognitively intense meditative state. Whereas during metta, we have seen there is an enhanced theta. So enhanced theta is an index of meditation, and it is associated with a blissful state and mental quiescence and so on. Whereas enhanced alpha is associated with, like it is an indication of cortical gating. So when somebody is doing meditation, there is an inward attention. So it is associated with sustained inward attention as well as sensory blocking of the sensory processing. So the whole cortical activities are associated exclusively with the meditation practice. And also we have had a small collaboration with Srivas Chennu, and we have also looked at the connectivity analysis, and we have observed that these advanced meditation practitioners have got, this is with regard to alpha power, we can see that enhanced connectivity during that meditation phase. And also I just, whereas novice, you see that novice that is less than 1,000 hours of meditation, that is almost less than 1 year of meditation experience, even though they were also into meditation state, and they could also bring a global increase in increase in power. The power changes are different from that of advanced meditators. Novice meditators have shown there is an enhanced delta as well as gamma activity. So this delta and gamma activity are associated with enhanced mental activity, and that means these practitioners are doing meditation with an internally engaged, effortful state of consciousness. They have to be very, they have to be very conscious, and they have to be, with a great effort, they are putting their, mind into meditation. Whereas that is why this meditation state is associated with enhanced delta and gamma, whereas in the advanced meditators, they can just directly enter into theta alpha or theta or alpha, and that is an indication of effortless way of doing meditation. The same practitioners, we have also studied their cognitive performance, especially the P3EEG. P3EEG is nothing but an index of neurophysiological index of cognition. So we studied this P300 wave pattern using some appropriate technique like oddball paradigm, and we look at the amplitude of the wave. And when the amplitude of the wave, so the attention is directly correlated with the amplitude of the P300 wave. And here also we have observed a very nice EEG dynamics. Like you can see that the advanced meditators, especially not the first column, the second and third column, you can see that there is desynchrony of alpha as well as reduction of theta. Whereas the first extreme left, you can see there is an enhancement of theta as well as alpha. There is not much alpha desynchrony. So again, you can see these distinctions. They are able to perform the task well, but with a different recruitment of these EEG dynamics. So this also we considered that this is also advanced meditators. You can see this alpha desynchrony as well as reduced theta. So that means they are able to perform very effortlessly, whereas the novice practitioners, they perform well, but with a lot of effort, mental effort. We have extensively studied the sleep organization among these practitioners, and this is the hypnogram, and this hypnogram tells you all about how meditation, helps in establishing a proper sleep organization. We have observed there is enhanced slow wave sleep state, deep sleep state, as well as enhanced REM sleep state. That black bars indicate REM sleep. The lower 3, 4, like the first column you can see. So these are indications of enhanced slow wave sleep state, that is deep sleep state. So meditators have shown enhanced deep sleep state, enhanced REM sleep state, as well as we have also looked at the age-associated changes in meditation practitioners. And we see that in terms of the amount of wakefulness, total duration of sleep, as well as sleep efficiency. And we saw that, as you all know, that during aging, you can see the sleep quality decreases, the sleep duration reduces, as well as the sleep efficiency index come down. This is because the whole sleep hypnogram will be interrupted by intermittent awakenings, fragmentation of REM sleep, and so on, you can see. Whereas in the case of meditators, we didn't see much. The sleep duration across, you can see here from 30 to almost 60 years, almost same, the top panel. And here, there is reduction of intermittent awakening as well as sleep efficiency index remain almost more than 80%. So these are the changes what we have observed in terms of sleep. And as meditation enhances mind-body harmony, we didn't want to stop our studies exclusively with only with changing, looking at the sleep pattern as well as the brain states during meditation. We have also looked at the parasympathetic, how meditation modulate the autonomic functions during sleep. We have observed that there is a persistent increase in parasympathetic activity across sleep states. So you know that parasympathetic activity is an index of deep relaxation, and especially this during REM sleep, that is very important. So during REM sleep, usually it is a sympathetic surge you can see in normal non-meditating individuals, whereas in the case of meditation, especially the slow wave, the senior practitioners, you can see a very persistent increase in parasympathetic activity along with the sympathetic activity. And so that the sympathovagal, it can take care of the sympathovagal balance, and that can establish a proper sleep quality as well as cardiac protection. Otherwise, you can see that it can be challenging for the cardiac functions also if there is a sympathetic surge. So here, it takes care of that sympathetic surge. It just mitigates the sympathetic surge, and you can see a perfect sympathovagal balance just by increasing the parasympathetic activity. So these are all examples of how visceral integration is taking place during meditation. And also we have observed a beautiful correlation between various hormone levels with that of the deep sleep, like DHEA, melatonin. Melatonin, at least probably you may be knowing that melatonin is very important for sleep initiation as well as maintenance. It is not only that, there are many hormones, but these are the two hormones we have studied. And it enhances various sleep-inducing mechanisms and thus enhances the sleep efficiency. And in addition, these hormones are also very important. They reduce anxiety. They have got a very significant anxiolytic properties, and accordingly it improves coping skills, enhance positive mood, and enhance overall quality of life. So you see that in total, comprehensively, you can see that whole effect can be seen throughout the body as well as the brain and mind. So when we have studied this, we have got certain ideas like how, okay, only one meditation tradition we have studied very deeply. So we thought, okay, what about the other meditation traditions? Because India has got many meditation traditions, and it is an opportunity for us to study these. Even though, and you can see that each tradition has its own technique they use. So Vipassana has a mindfulness technique, Brahma Kumari's eyes open contemplation, and things like that. So we thought we will study these also in detail about Vipassana meditation, Brahma Kumaris. Brahma Kumaris we have already initiated more than 5 years ago. Isha Yoga is going on now. Heartfulness meditation, we have just conducted a pilot study, and we will be taking up a very big study. Simplified Kundalini Yoga as well as with Buddhist, as Gisha was mentioning that we will be collaborating. So we will be taking up this wisdom-based Buddhist meditation technique, especially loving kindness, emptiness, compassion meditation, so that we get an idea about how these meditation techniques, various meditation techniques bring various spiritual experiences associated with meditation. So these studies are going on. I think I don't think I will explain these now. So these studies are going on. Here I just wanted to tell you that, see, in Vipassana meditation, we saw the highly synchronized wave pattern only among the advanced meditators, whereas here you see that even among the novice, this is a record of the novice. So like it's all depends upon the kind of technique as well as the proficiency. And so to sum up, this meditation practices definitely short-term effects. You can see that it promotes relaxation, positive affect, reduces anxieties, and reduces stress, improve attention, cognition, and overall well-being. Whereas, and there are some aspects of neural plasticity you can also see. But you can see that the transformation, the individual, experience, transformation in our experience when there is, when among the long-term practitioners. So long-term practitioners, so these, the whole network property only is changing actually. So that brings enhanced resilience. The brain becomes more resilient, and there is efficient network processing, and definitely that leads to the manifestation of various virtues, I can say, like emotion regulation, self-regulation, mental equanimity, compassion, empathy, many things. Because this, some of the studies, especially Buddhist studies, have already come up with how the compassion meditation activates certain areas that maintains this compassion state, and so on. So I just want to wind up that. So these are the studies we have initiated, and only up to this we have completed. So to sum up, with regard to the neuroscience of consciousness, for example, when we are like non-meditating individuals, the functional connectivity may not be too intense like meditation practitioners. So even in this normal brain activity, we have the basic consciousness of feeling, perception, and so on. And even with this ordinary brain network, you can also enter into a metaconsciousness state. Like, say, for example, the speakers yesterday have already discussed, even, see, when you are attentive to certain stimuli, you can experience, you can appreciate the content of consciousness. So that means the attention is so important that takes you to a different level of consciousness. Whereas in this case of long-term practitioners, definitely with enhanced resilience, enhanced network processing, definitely they are able to enter into this meta-consciousness state for a sustained period of time. Whereas with ordinary brain, maybe they can just experience and, for a short time and come back to the basic consciousness. So these are the understanding what we have now at present. And with this, and these studies, as well as our other collaborative studies on understanding, consciousness, disorders of consciousness from neuropsychiatric disorders, and have helped us to establish the Center for Consciousness Studies in 2020. So with the following mission and vision. So when we have organized this conference, we had various objectives in our mind. One is to have a consortium with scientists and people who are working in the area of consciousness, so that we can go ahead, we can have a lot of discussions, collaborations, and both whether it is with empirical ideas or even theoretical ideas. Ultimately, we should be able to integrate these to understand what is consciousness. So that is the idea. Thank you so much for your attention. These studies are, there are my collaborators from NIMHANS, from other institutions. Thank you so much.